Welcome to the AFR Saints channel, where we provide you daily content on your favorite team, the New Orleans Saints. Do us a favor and hit that subscribe button. Be sure to leave your comments below and smash that like button. Who dat? So, the New Orleans Saints are continuing their search for a new head coach, and this process just got complicated. On Monday, we talked about Doug Peterson. Doug Peterson has formally interviewed for the Saints head coaching job. Won a Super Bowl with the Eagles. We went through all of that, the pros and cons. If you missed it on Monday's show, you can check it out on the YouTube channel, the AFR Saints YouTube channel, or on demand. We've also talked about the other guys who have been formally requested for interviews. If it's Dennis Allen and Aaron Glenn, sounds like Darren Rizzi is going to get an interview as well. A lot of defensive-minded guys. And the other is Brian Flores. Flores had dinner, reportedly, as according to Nick Underhill. Flores had dinner in Mobile with the Saints on Monday, and is having his formal interview today, Tuesday, with the Saints in Mobile, or is set to. No word as if whether or not that's happened yet. Flores is also interviewed with the Bears and the Giants. He didn't get either of those jobs. Matt Eberflus was hired by Chicago, and Brian Daboll was hired by the Giants. More on the Giants in a second, because the lawsuit filed by Brian Flores is sort of directly related to what's happened in New York, and it's complicated things a little bit. My intention in this segment was to talk about Brian Flores as a coaching candidate. And I'm going to do that, but that conversation is complicated now because of because of Brian Flores' lawsuit. If you haven't heard, Flores is suing the NFL teams, as he's alleging racism in hiring practices. He's alleging discrimination regarding the interview process with Denver and New York, and in his firing by Miami. It's a 58-page lawsuit. Flores claims, among other things, that Dolphins owner Stephen Ross attempted to incentivize him to tank. Offered him $100,000 for every game the team lost. In 2019, by the way. Flores alleges that when they won games late in the season, the GM told him that Ross was, quote, mad that Flores' on-field success was compromising the team's draft position. Flores also claims Ross pressured him into recruiting a, quote, prominent quarterback at the end of the 2019 season, which Flores refused to do because that would have been tampering. Flores was fired on January the 10th, despite back-to-back winning seasons, as we know. More on that in a second. Flores also alleged that the Giants interviewed him last month just to be compliant with the Rooney rules. In fact, he says he interviewed with the Giants on January the 18th, prior to the team hiring former Bills assistant GM Joe Shane on January 23rd. So they interviewed Flores before they interviewed the guy they hired for GM. And the kicker is that apparently Bill Belichick texted Flores to say, congrats. He said, I heard from Buffalo and the Giants that you were their guy. Well, he meant to text Brian Daboll. Instead, he texted Brian Flores. And so Flores, while he thinks he's being interviewed for the Giants gig, has learned days in advance that they're actually hiring Brian Daboll. So, in any event, Belichick texted him, quote, sorry, I effed this up. I double-checked and I misread the text. I think they were naming Brian Daboll. I'm sorry about that. So, Belichick kind of goofed. Anyway, I don't know how that's all going to transpire. I'm not a lawyer. I don't know. We'll let that play out. I don't know how or if that will complicate Brian Flores' candidacy with the Saints or any other team. It might. I mean, if you have someone that's suing the league and teams, it might be really hard to hire someone that's suing you. What I'd like to do, and this may sound stupid at this point, but I do want to talk about Brian Flores as a candidate for New Orleans, understanding that all of this may be completely moot given the nature of the lawsuit. When I think about Brian Flores, on one hand, it's very exciting because he is the hottest head coaching free agent in this coaching carousel cycle. That's fair to say. Most people were surprised that he was fired in Miami. And maybe this is this is adding color to the picture as to why he was fired in Miami, potentially. And he's interviewed with everybody, and it seemed as though he might have options and could pick his spot, but he hasn't gotten any of the jobs where coaches have already been hired in Chicago and New York and in Denver, and Las Vegas with McDaniels going there. So it's very exciting at the thought that you could land Brian Flores. On the other hand, I think it is also fair to ask, like, what do we know about Flores and what has he done as a head coach? I think beyond having a winning record in Miami the last 2 years and losing 7 straight this year, then winning 7 straight, I don't know that we know much collectively. So I kind of went and peeled. Maybe I'm just speaking for myself, but I'll acknowledge flatly, I didn't know a ton about him and his background other than he came from New England. So as a head coach in 3 years, he never made the playoffs. But consider this. Miami's only, and I didn't realize this, man. It's stunning. Miami's only made 2 playoff appearances since 2002. You realize that? And they have not won a playoff game. Miami has not won a playoff game in 20 years. The Miami Dolphins have not won a playoff game in 20 years. The last time Miami had back-to-back winning seasons was 02-03, before Brian Flores did it. And that was in a stretch where they had 7 straight winning seasons from 97 to 03 under Jimmy Johnson and Dave Wannstedt. It's been a long time since Miami had the kind of success Brian Flores has had the last 2 years. So circumstantially, it makes a little sense when you look at the lawsuit and the allegations and go, man, what's something else going on there? Like, clearly, Stephen Ross and Brian Flores didn't get along. Like, there was stuff going on there. Before Miami, he spent 15 years in New England, in the front office and then on field. He was 22 years old, Brian Flores was, when he was hired by New England as a scout. 22. Played collegiately at Boston College. Injuries cost him a chance at the NFL. Went into the front office in New England. And he was there from the time he was 22 to the time he was 37 when he was hired by the Dolphins. Held basically every spot you can imagine, climbing his way through the ranks in the front office, then on the field in New England. And I believe, look, there is certainly something to be said about Belichick's assistants. And you could say, is he just the next in a long line of guys that weren't great head coaches in the NFL? From Al Groh to Nick Saban to Romeo Crennel to Eric Mangini to Jim Schwartz and Josh McDaniels and Bill O'Brien and Matt Patricia and Joe Judge and now Brian Flores. Like, is he just the next in a long line of guys that got their opportunities because of their affiliation with the Patriots and with Belichick that aren't really ready to stand on their own? Or is it the guy where you go, that's the only input he's ever had, right? And when you think about it, when your coaching brain is very malleable, right? And you're like a sponge and you're soaking everything up, and your impression, your introduction is the gold standard, and that's how things are done, that's easily maybe replicable. Whereas if you watch a poorly run organization, but that's all you know, you could tend to develop bad habits. It's almost like if you're a child and you watch your parents do things that maybe aren't necessarily on the up and up, you might be more inclined to do it. It's sort of like the nature versus nurture type thing. Well, he was nurtured in New England for 15 years, and that was the gold standard. He won 4 Super Bowls there. I mean, there's a lot that he learned about how an organization runs, which makes a lot of sense, and maybe is why he was able to have the success he did in Miami. I love that he's young. He's only 40 years old. And I don't necessarily love the idea of hiring old NFL retreads. That said, Andy Reid and Bruce Arians are old NFL retreads that have won Super Bowls with their current teams in the last 2 years. So there's merit to that as well. We talked on Monday about Doug Peterson, a guy who won a Super Bowl and is interviewed for the Saints job, and I think would be an attractive hire because he's the kind of guy that might be able to attract a high-profile quarterback to New Orleans to play for him. Brian Flores would be a fascinating hire. I think the big question for New Orleans is, are you looking to make an offensive coaching hire or a defensive coaching hire? Do you want to have someone who brings in their own offensive scheme and you just uproot everything from the Peyton Breeze era, from scheme, personnel, terminology, everything, and do your own thing? Or do you want to keep that structure in place and bring in somebody who's a defensive-minded coach, which would make sense about elevating Dennis Allen? You keep a lot of that structure in place. You bring in Flores. I don't know. And ultimately, the Saints have to answer that. My general feeling is keep your culture. Culture is the most important thing, and the Saints have a great culture, and that's the thing that is so hard to find throughout professional sports. And the Saints have done a magnificent job of having people all throughout the organization that are bought in, and I would hate to disrupt that. That would be my choice. I don't know what direction the Saints are going to go. But I would be pretty fired up if they hired Brian Flores, because he's a young guy, feels kind of like the defensive version of Sean Payton when you hired him back in 2005, 2006. And I would love to see how that might all play out. Could he be a guy that's here for a decade plus? Potentially. You could repeat that success with a guy on the defensive side. But in having this conversation, we have to mention the fact that Brian Flores is suing the NFL and the Miami Dolphins and others alleging racism throughout the hiring process. Does that impact his ability or opportunity to be hired for a job in New Orleans or anywhere else? That's what we'll just have to wait and see. But the Saints are set to formally meet with Brian Flores and formally interview him Tuesday, tonight, here in Mobile for they're at the Senior Bowl. We'll let you know how it goes. Hey, thanks so much for watching. Please leave your comments. I love to interact. And be sure to hit the red subscribe button below.